So we've all heard how wonderful the CPU is, the new platform that supports it, and even seen stuff about the CPU running on older X470, 370, and other Ryzen boards, which is also really great. But one question that a number of people have asked, and of course I'm just curious myself, even though I am running Windows 10 on this, but can this board and CPU run on Windows 7? And I have to tell you with great happiness, the answer is a very troubling but a good yes. I did find a pretty good method. Is it going to be easy? No, of course not. It wasn't even easy getting this thing to work on the first generation Ryzen. Second generation Ryzen as well, but first was definitely a tough one, and this is definitely going to be a bit complicated as well too. There are a couple of things you're going to need to do this, whether you want to get a good copy of Windows 7 running, or even if you want just one of your little illegitimate copies of Windows 7. But either way, you definitely can get it up and running, and I'm just going to list a couple of things you're going to need. One thing for sure you're going to need is a Ps2 port. Now this particular board I got here, which may have been a little bit of a selling point for me, it actually does have a Ps2 port. So what's good about this? Well, I can use a Ps2 mouse and or a keyboard. I know there's a dongle out there that does split one Ps2 port into two, so you can actually hook up a keyboard and mouse. But if you can only use one, the mouse is going to be the saver in this particular method. Now, if you don't have a port available, don't fret. They do have cards out there that you can actually purchase, and I'll definitely go ahead and show you one real quick. That you can actually put in the cart in one of your slots, and you'll be able to actually get Ps2 ports. Please note though, one little common mistake some people have made: they've gone out and purchased, which they're available, believe it or not, they're still around, but they actually purchase a PCI card that has Ps2 ports. You can actually see this board does not have any PCI slots. This is a PCI Express slot, so you might need a card like this. Here's an example of the card that will actually be useful to you. PCI Express to PC2 ports, PS2 ports. Saying this so many times, it starts not to make any sense now. And this one actually has a keyboard and mouse PS2 port, so it's actually quite useful. The only downfall is that these particular cards are not widely available, and I did see one online retailer selling it for a little over $40, which is a little steep for a card you're just going to use just to get Windows 7 up and running and then never use it again. But something to keep in mind. So if you're actually looking to upgrade to Ryzen 3rd generation with the newer chipset motherboard, you might want to try to get your hands on a motherboard with already a Ps2 port on it. I know there's a few motherboard brands out there that do not have it, and if you might actually be a decisive basically what's going to make up your mind on which board to get. So just something to keep in mind. A big reason for this is, well, in other videos that I've actually mentioned where the installation USB tool that we set up for Windows 7, a little custom made, will actually inject USB 3 drivers. Well, the AMD Ryzen 3rd generation is actually controlling all the USB controllers now, as opposed to random manufacturers like ASMedia, VIA, or other chips on the board controlling your stuff, even some from Intel, believe it or not, on Ryzen boards. So now Ryzen is going to be controlling all of them, and those usually will not work with the method I explained in another video, where you actually do build your Windows 7 USB thumb drive installation and have certain drivers injected. So just want to let you know one little reason why it's actually not going to work. The good thing is, no matter what board you get, if you are using the Ryzen 3rd generation, the drivers will actually be the same across all of them. At least that's what I read. So you're actually going to be installing USB 3 drivers, or in this case USB 3.2 gen drivers, that are going to be controlled by AMD. Another little thing you might be able to look into, if obviously $40 is too steep and you're out of luck with a motherboard currently that does not have a PS2 port, they do have
PCI Express that converts to PCI slots, basically these little ribbons or riser cables, pretty popular during the mining days with graphic cards and whatnot. And that can actually convert one of these cards that usually uses a regular PCI slot, which is obviously much more available and definitely much cheaper. I've seen them as cheap as 10 bucks. So that's another option you might want to take. Again, you know, we're not looking for beauty or anything like that. This is going to be a one-time use only. So if you actually have to leave a little PCI slot just laying on the bottom of your computer, connected to a riser cable to a PCI Express slot, I think, you know, just a few minutes of that probably won't hurt. A couple of other things you should probably get your hands on, just off the back, obviously. Chipset drivers from AMD's website. Now I know you're going to scratch your head and say, well, Ed, I went to AMD's website and there are no X570 chipset drivers for Windows 7, and you are correct. However, scroll back to X470 chipset and you'll see Windows 7 again, and if you actually download both files from AMD's website, the one for X470 and the one for X570, they're actually the same file. And basically the chipset drivers are actually for both chipsets. So go ahead and download the latest copy of the X470 chipset drivers, or whichever chipset you previously were using, but let's just go for X470. It's probably the same across all the boards anyway. Go ahead and download that, and you can see I just downloaded this one literally a night ago. Another thing you want to have here as well too is that file. If you are going to be doing Windows 7 updates after you do successfully get this working, you want to get that tool downloaded. I'll leave a link in the description below to basically bypass the unsupported hardware blah that happens when you have an unsupported modern CPU and you are running Windows 7, so it blocks you off Windows updates. So that's definitely something to download as well too. Not necessary before installation, but might as well just get out of the way. The chipset driver is obviously very, very important to have right after installation. Now, another thing I have here, and I'm going to put a link in the description below. Hopefully that link will stay alive, but if not, I'm going to actually put my own link, and you know, keep an eye on the description below because I'll definitely have a link here. These are beta drivers. Well, I might not say beta, but let's just call them beta. These are beta chipset X570 drivers, modified drivers that I found online, and these are supposed to work with USB 3.2. Finding USB 3.2 drivers for Windows 7 has been a real pain, and turns out basically just need a little modification on the INI files and whatnot. You can actually see here it's tagged as beta, so, and here you go. So these files are going to be very important to have on hand once Windows 7 is installed, to get all those USB ports working. Now once you install a driver for one, all the other USB ports should probably just kick in shortly after, and I'll definitely go ahead and demonstrate. That was actually a real wonder to see that work. Definitely an amazing thing. If you are installing Windows 7 on NVMe, go ahead and install any driver you have for that, whether it's Samsung, Intel, whatnot. I believe there are actually some already here, but you know, let's just put that aside for now. I did also download the network driver for this particular Intel network port that this particular board had, which I believe is an Intel i211. Now obviously when I googled it, there's only drivers for Windows 8 and Windows 10, but guess what? I downloaded the Windows 8 one, and of course it works for Windows 7 as well too. You may not have an Intel port, you may have a Realtek, or maybe some external ones, so you can go ahead and try to download a driver for that before you give this a shot. If it's from Realtek, I believe Realtek's, just like their audio drivers, their network drivers are probably one big file for all recent and available LAN cards, so just something to get your hands on. So definitely try to have that on hand too, because getting a network up is always a helpful thing as well. Swapping USB thumb drives between one computer and another can be a little painstaking. Besides a PS2 mouse or PS2 keyboard, another thing you'll definitely need are USB thumb drives to prep your installation. I highly recommend, if you do have one available, to use one that's actually USB 2. Here's my old USB 2. This little funny Lego brick here is also a USB 2. This one, where I have a little Windows 7 installation, is actually USB 3, and I'll definitely demonstrate why. And I'll even give you an example. When installing on this, everything works just fine, but once I get to the point where I actually have to select the hard drive, it doesn't see anything, and I have to install drivers. Now the funny thing is, and I'll demonstrate this as well in a moment, it actually can see my secondary regular physical hard drive, where I keep a bunch of files and setup files in. So you're wondering, if I can see the hard drive, why is it asking me for a driver? I don't know, funny goof.
Another good thing to do if you do have this installed on a USB 3 USB drive, you can actually plug it into a USB 2.0 port, and that'll actually do the trick as well too. I actually have run into this bug in the past when dealing with first and second generation Ryzen. However, this board, just an example, does not have USB 2.0 ports, so obviously this is not really going to help me out. So definitely just keep that in mind, just in case you do run into that little glitch, which can be a little painstaking. If you do have an optical drive available, another good thing to have is Windows 7 installation available on a disk, just in case. Believe it or not, I did have success with this as well, even though this does not have any extra drivers or whatnot injected into the installation. So, and this is not even SP1 either. So just something else to keep in mind. Another device you actually might need is one of these little external enclosures. You can actually plug in the SSD drive or the other drive that you're going to be installing Windows 7 on, and connect it to another computer. Now, if you don't have one of these, not a big deal. You can always take your drive, your destination drive from Windows 7, and actually piggyback it on another computer. And this will be really useful when once you finish your Windows 7 installation, you can actually physically move that drive over to another computer and copy all the files, such as the chipset drivers and the other files I mentioned as well too. This actually can make things a little easier. You put your little SSD drive in here, and then you just plug it in USB to another computer and just copy everything over. If you're using an NVMe drive, there are actually enclosures that can actually do the same exact thing. You plug in your little drive in here, the chip, and you can actually just plug it into another computer. Another method, if you'd like, is to temporarily install Windows 7 onto a regular SSD drive that'll actually go in here. And then you can, once you get Windows 7 up and running and everything, you can actually clone it into your NVMe drive. And that's actually another method. I do have a video on how to do that involving Samsung drives. There's actually other cloning software that's really great. Cronus is actually a really good piece of software as well too. So just keep that in mind. But, you know, if you would like to avoid all this, you can also just always physically pull the drive out and just piggyback on another computer and copy everything you need. So here's a computer I recently upgraded to Ryzen 3rd generation. I'm going to be using this as my little test computer. I did go ahead and remove my NVMe drive that I actually installed Windows 10 on, and just plugged in a unused Samsung drive, as well as just wanted to demonstrate something as well too. Also have my mechanical hard drive plugged in as well too, so just wanted to go ahead and demonstrate something. So I'm just booting it up here. Well, here we are on the BIOS, and just wanted to let you know before you even start attempting any of this, go ahead and go to boot and make sure whatever brand motherboard you have, that you do have your boot mode selected to legacy and not just UEFI. In this case, obviously it's both of them, but make sure it's some sort of legacy. Set up your hard drive that you'll be installing Windows 7 as a potential boot device, and also here I just put the CD drive and the USB thumb drive that I'm going to be using to install as a boot device. So go ahead and take care of that first. If you try to install Windows 7 with this set to UEFI, it is absolutely not even going to go any further. So take care of this ASAP before you can begin. So you can see here we have the Windows 7 installation starting up. Now there's two major methods to actually go ahead and install this operating system, and this is actually going to be the slightly more complicated one. And I actually did cover both of these methods in 2 videos. You can go ahead and check them out. One of them is actually using just the modified USB Windows 7 installation thumb drive using the Gigabyte tool that I mentioned in that video. Basically, it injects some USB 3 drivers in there, along with some other stuff, including NVMe support.
So obviously you'll be able to use, let's say your USB mouse, which obviously is not working here, but I do have a PS2 plugged in. So that definitely does make things a little easier. However, if a lot of things are in your way, and unfortunately more things are going to be in our way when we're doing a Windows 7 installation on 3rd generation Ryzen, especially with an X570 chipset, the other method actually could be a little more appealing, where basically you install Windows 7 on an older machine of yours that doesn't have any of these issues. And just as Windows 7 installation is finishing up, you go ahead and disconnect, well, obviously you power it down as soon as your second reboot is going through, and you go ahead and power down your machine and migrate your hard drive right back into your Ryzen 3000 base PC again. Your computer will boot up into Windows 7 with no drivers, and you'll get to the main, basically your first boot up screen, asking you for username and all that jazz.
So either way, you will end up, whether you do this method or the other method, you'll still end up at that screen with the same issue, obviously, no USB support. So here I'm just going to be using this particular method here, but I did want to share with you one little glitch. As you saw, I did have that USB 3 thumb drive with my Windows 7 installation on it going, so I'm going to go ahead and just proceed here, and I'm going to show you what I run into. You can see it's basically asking for a driver. This is where, obviously your hard drive is not being picked up for whatever reason. You have the option to install its driver and get everything going. Usually you'll see this if you're trying to install Windows on a RAID-based hard drive or some other controller that's just not recognized. Now, here's the goofy part. Usually you'll just plug in the USB or even put in a CD if you have an optical drive. But here's the goofy part. You see this? This is my mechanical hard drive that I still have plugged in. And I just plugged it in just for, just shits and giggles. And it actually recognizes my hard drive. Now, this is a 3 terabyte hard drive last time I looked. And it is more than capable of having a Windows 7 installation, but it doesn't show up. So this is a little glitch I've run into even before 3rd generation Ryzen came out, when I was trying to install Windows 7 on the computer and using a USB 3 port. So in other videos I did mention using a plugging in your thumb drive into a USB 2 port, and this is exactly why. It's and what's even worse is if actually, let's say I did plug in the CD, and trust me, I've tried. If you plug in the CD with the correct drivers to get this hard drive to work, it won't even recognize it whatsoever. So it's a loss here. So just keep that in mind. If you actually do have your Windows 7 installation on a thumb drive, it's a USB 3 plugged into a USB 3 port, you will probably run into this issue. If you have an available USB 2 port, which unfortunately this port does not, go ahead and plug it into USB 2 and you should be able to avoid this little glitch here. The motherboards actually do have USB 2 port headers, so if you actually do have old USB 2 port little brackets so you can plug the cable in and temporarily use it, that may be another way to bypass this as well. But if all else fails, you can always move your hard drive to an older computer, install Windows 7 there up to a certain point, and I'll definitely have a link for that video, how to do that, and then just migrate your Windows 7 base installation back into this particular computer. So let's go ahead and start this over and get Windows 7 up and running. So if you heard that whirling sound a moment ago, that's basically my trying to install Windows 7 using the old classic
DVD method, believe it or not. Now I'm going to show you a little difference here, just using a DVD that's got no injected drivers into it. Obviously the injected USB 3 drivers will not assist me in this case. So you can just tell USB mouse and keyboard are not working. I'm still using a PS2 mouse here. I'm going to go ahead and proceed. Now that I do have everything, the computer configured the way I want it to be with Windows 7 installation, I did go ahead and disconnect my mechanical hard drive just so there's no confusion or anything. So just keep that in mind. If you do have any other drives, even a secondary drive that's going to not have your OS, it's not a bad idea just to go ahead and disconnect it at this time. You can always reconnect it later and everything will still be just right. So now you'll see it's not bugging me for any hard drive drivers or anything. Really weird. And I'm just going to pick Windows 7. I agree. Not to rip off your software. Obviously custom. And you'll see it does pick up my Samsung 850 drive, which is a 256 SSD. So just going to go ahead and just hit next, and there we go. So just definitely can't stress more about that USB 3 to USB 2 port issue. Possibly even using a USB 2 thumb drive in a USB 3 should work as well too. There are another couple options available to you. You can always try to really put some thought into it about particular methods to get this to work. But like I said, the piggybacking the hard drive on another computer and temporarily installing Windows 7 on that should be a good solid method just to get past this really difficult but unfortunately easy part. And then we're going to run into the next difficult part, which is getting the drivers on. Now you are going to have to piggyback this hard drive anyway on another computer, because we do have to copy our files, and obviously our USB 3 ports are not going to be working, so plugging in the thumb drive with all the data we need is not going to work here. So we will be needing to piggyback this drive either to an external enclosure like I showed you before, or just piggybacking it as a secondary on already working operating system and just copying files over. It doesn't even have to be any Windows 7, Windows 10, it could even be XP if you wanted it. So get all those files over as I mentioned earlier in the video. Now again, if there's some drivers you didn't get your hands on, not a problem. Obviously audio drivers or video card drivers, that all can come later. Video card drivers come from either AMD or NVIDIA, or even some onboard Intel or whatever, which actually you won't be having if you are using Ryzen. And of course any particular sound card drivers or any other cards you have installed on your card. Once we get all the basics and you get network up and running, by all means go ahead and start downloading everything you need. One big note I do want to point out here is that Ryzen CPUs with integrated graphic controllers on them, I believe those are the CPUs that end with the letter U. So example 2300 or 2200U, or I'm pretty sure now there's 3000s with U's. These CPUs have issues with Windows 7. You start running into BSODs quite often. And I know there are some people who said they found some workarounds for this. It's nothing too solid and straightforward, so you will definitely have problems. If you really want to use Ryzen 3rd gen or even any other Ryzen CPU on Windows 7, I highly recommend you get a CPU that does not have the onboard graphic, and then you can just use another graphic card as your video card driver. This also applies to using that CPU. Even if you're not using the onboard, you may still have issues with that particular APU, even if you're using some NVIDIA or AMD card as well too. So just keep that in mind. This method will not work. And obviously you can definitely see the CD doing this magic, and it's taking its time installing. So I'm just going to go ahead and stop this and skip till it's close to 100%, and then we'll take it from there.
Well, the installation's still going, and I gotta tell you, installing from a DVD, gosh, does that take a while. It probably would have been better if I moved the CD over. The reason I'm installing through DVD, by the way, if anyone's curious, is obviously my Windows 7 installation is on a USB thumb drive. Sorry if all you see is a little shadow of some rectangular piece of plastic. And I just don't really feel like migrating everything over into a USB 2 thumb drive, so I'm just going to do it the hard way and just let it install. But pretty interesting that Windows 7 is installing off a CD that's not even SP1, nor does it have any extra drivers on there. This is just basically an old Windows 7 CD and DVD installation I just had, which is literally tossed aside. So definitely keep that in mind. It's always still an option, and it does actually recognize the hard drives. I know some modern day computers using Intel chipsets and CPUs. I know Skylake, for example, did give me that issue where it would not pick up the hard drive at all, and I did have to use some drivers, but the USB ports weren't working
because there was no USB 2 port. So obviously I had to borrow another computer to piggyback the hard drive on and install it.
We're almost about done here. And once we get to the first boot up, I'll go ahead and click over there. Well, here we are. The installation is done and first boot up is about to happen. Around this time, after the second restart from the Windows 7 installation, if you are piggyback installing this on another computer, is the time where you would actually go ahead and shut down the computer, move your hard drive back, and then plug it into your third generation Ryzen computer. And here we are. Once you boot it up, you'll basically be seeing exactly where we are here. So whichever method you actually used, this is where we meet up
and see exactly the same thing. I can probably go ahead and eject the DVD drive, but I'll just do that afterwards since it's no longer installing. And here we are. So depending if you do have access to a PS2 keyboard, this will be easy. If you don't, but obviously do have access to at least a mouse, you can just go ahead and click here, the ease of access.
Make your computer easier to use.
And of course, obviously it's talking to me. And we want the on-screen keyboard. Hit OK. Just take a moment. And here we are. Sorry if this thing's big, but don't worry about it. Once we log in, we'll increase the resolution and all these windows will appear much smaller. So let's just go ahead and enter a name. I'm just going to give it the usual name that I give. Whoops. And that computer name, actually one of my friends from many years ago actually gave it. She did originally name it with the CH, and I just changed it to a K. So hit enter. Password, not going to put any password. Ask me later. Put down Eastern time. Yes, it's 11 p.m. tonight. And here we go. Go ahead and, well, actually, I'll just leave it open.
It may or may not reboot one more time.
That's okay. I believe it will reboot, actually. And it sure will. Go ahead and eject the DVD.
Now around this time, if you actually did get into Windows 7 and you decide not to reboot, this would be a good time to go ahead and shut down the computer and get ready to migrate those files, the chipset drivers, the experimental USB 3.2 drivers that I showed you. And again, I will definitely have a link to all this stuff below. Chipset drivers, obviously, you can just get off AMD's website or the motherboard manufacturer's website as well too. Might want to just get off AMD just to, obviously, why not? It's AMD's latest stuff. And any other drivers that you want to also put in as well too. Not necessary right now. The only two things we need is chipset and the USB 3. So we will be installing the chipset driver first. Very important to do that before you attempt to install those beta drivers. So right now we have our first official Windows 7 boot up. I'm just going to show you something real quick. Well, let's make it easier on everyone. I'm going to minimize this. Going to go here, my computer, minimize this, and you can actually see here Ryzen 9 3900 12 core CPU. And again, if you also want to see this, because for some reason I'm always crazy to see this, make this a little bigger, and there you can see all 24 cores and threads. Pretty amazing. So obviously the big mess that comes with this is, you can imagine, everything's missing. So we're going to knock out 1, 2, 3, 4 controllers, and some of these devices will also get installed with the chipset. So let's go ahead and shut this down and migrate those files. All right, so here we are, we're in. Get this keyboard out of the way, and there is the folder that I copied over. Just named it, obviously, very well, Windows 7 Ryzen 3000. So first thing we're going to do is go ahead and get this chipset drivers installed. Here we have the chipset drivers ready to work, ready to rock and roll. Go ahead and accept. Here you are, go to custom install just so we see what's installing here. So we'll just go ahead and hit install. Obviously you didn't notice that the USB 3 drivers are not listed there, and some other stuff is not listed there either. This is to be expected, but I just wanted to get the chipset driver out of the way. So we're going to go ahead and restart and install those beta drivers.
Booting up again.
The last time that booted up, actually it booted up quite a bit faster, so it kind of varies for a moment.
Looks like it's going to boot up pretty quick again this time. So let's go to Device Manager and see, you can actually see that the correct AMD SATA driver was installed. I'm going to just skip this for now. I actually do want to see what else was actually installed in Device Manager. Not too much, unfortunately, so, but I did want to get rid of that chipset driver. So here comes the tricky part, and I definitely do want you guys just to take note here. Here we have the experimental drivers. This one.
Now, this actually might take a little trial and error. However, last time I installed this, I didn't actually have to force it, do a driver force installation, and then actually get something that will BSOD me. So let's just try to go ahead and take this pretty easily. I'm just going to pick the first one, update driver, browse, going to direct it to here. USB 3.2 beta, hit OK, and you can see it didn't even ask me to force or anything. I'm just going to let it install. And you can see here, AMD USB 3.2 host controller. So that's one out of the way. However, very likely it's going to be the same driver for all of them. So let's go ahead and hit scan. You can see what's happening here, right? And guess what? My mouse and keyboard have just lit up. Just giving it a moment. And there we go. Start button. We no longer need this, as we now have USB support. Now, you might be wondering what this particular thing is here. This actually is related to the NVIDIA 2060 card that I have. It's supposed to be a USB Type-C driver. I actually did notice that in Windows 10 when I did install Windows 10 on this computer. I did have this issue where Windows 7 was recognizing this as an unknown, and no matter what I did, I could never get it to work. As particularly another PCI device here as well will also give me the same issue. So just keep that in mind. And on this particular computer, this is actually the issue. So USB support is now active, and why don't we just go ahead and plug in my little drive here, and you can actually see it plug it into the front USB ports, and there we go. This is actually my little Windows 7 thumb drive installation by Gigabyte, made with the Gigabyte tool, and it is up and running. So definitely good progress here. As I said earlier, I did also install my little, did actually have my LAN driver for this particular motherboard, so I'm just going to go ahead and install that too.
It's one of these. There we go.
The other network driver is actually either the Bluetooth or the, if I remember, this board actually does have two network ports. One of them is actually from Realtek, a 2.5G connection. And this one's actually your just everyday Gigabit port. So I did get this up and running, and I now have internet access. So good progress here so far, huh? Don't be scared about that red window. I am basically leading those unknown PCI devices into the other folder. If you saw here, system devices, and I just basically had to go in here. So now it's basically just installing drivers for there as well too. Obviously, because this is not, it's still a beta driver, not signed by anybody other than the person who made it. It's obviously giving me that warning error, so I'm just basically going ahead and install it. We'll just see one PCI device after another being installed. Well, after playing around with those unknown devices there, I did actually get this particular result here. 3 of them are still giving me issues because the driver is actually not digitally signed. So I'm actually hoping this is something that will be internally resolved once Windows 7 SP1 is installed, because right now you can see it doesn't even have SP1, nor any other particular updates or anything have been installed. So hopefully that's something that will be resolved internally. But here's the good news. This, as I said, is related to my video card. This is also related to my video card. This is in the unknown little 2.5G Realtek, which I can probably get a driver for. And if you just leave this out of the way, so far pretty decently so good. This is actually, a lot of people will agree, was the biggest challenge, and amazingly everything seems to be working. So far so good. I am going to go ahead and shoot a couple of updates and do the video card update as well too, the driver update, and see if it resolves any of these issues internally. So I did install SP1 and a bunch of more updates, as well as the video card driver, which is the RTX 2060. And obviously these little guys are still with the exclamation point. Now, I don't believe that they're not working. I just believe it's just giving me this warning saying that, oh, the driver's not digitally signed. So it's probably just giving that warning message. Obviously these are beta drivers, so it's not digitally signed by anybody. I guess you can always shoot me some feedback. Let me know what you think about this. But as you can see here, everything else seems to be running. And of course, the very important thing again, just to show you, the USB 3.2 ports all online and operational. Let me just go ahead and show you the driver a little bit more here. Digital signer, Ryzen Limited, and obviously a very recent date, just a month ago, basically. And again, showing you the processors over here. Oof. Of course, if this were a Threadripper, I'd probably have to be scrolling down because I keep hearing rumors of a new 64-core processor. Imagine 128. That'd be nuts. So, all in all, pretty good. I have not BSOD'd once at all, and I have installed a bunch of drivers. Obviously, the couple of unknowns here, I already displayed to you what those unknowns were. Even got my Bluetooth radio up here. So, I gotta tell you, so far this has been a pretty good success. Though, got some mixed thoughts on the time it takes to boot up. But again, if you do get this up and running as well too, following these steps, I definitely want to hear your feedback on that. So yes, I'm going to answer that question again. Yes, it is absolutely possible to get Windows 7 installed on Ryzen 9 actually, 3rd generation. And amazing news that is, to be honest, to hear. So obviously there may be a lot of questions and comments. Please go ahead and shoot them over. I'll be more happy to try to assist. This is definitely going to be
something that will probably get some attention.
I do have to warn you though, these methods
are not for the faint-hearted. If you're one of those people really determined to have Windows 7 on 3rd generation Ryzen, you definitely have some good experience with tech, have some good patience because you'll need it, and definitely have an open mind about how to get this up and running. So everything I gave you is a pretty good chunk of how to get it to work. You may run into a couple of walls, and you just have to use your mind and creativeness to get them past. My advice, obviously, that I give in this video will hopefully make that a lot easier and even actually help you get past it as well too. And I'm very happy to actually, if you actually do get this to work, I'm really happy to, and this video helped, I'm very happy to have taken part in that. I can't take all the credit, obviously, that's absolutely for sure. You know, this obviously was a little bit of a testing ground for me, and obviously did run into some walls myself, but so far so good. This method seems pretty solid. And again, please check out those other 2 videos. Definitely will shoot links below. One, how to set up the Gigabyte tool for USB, how to customize and inject drivers into Windows 7 installation. That method is obviously still very, very useful on older generation Ryzen CPUs. So if you're actually looking to update to 1st or 2nd generation Ryzen with Windows 7, that one of those 2 other methods will help definitely as well. Definitely check out those 2 videos. I hope you guys found this really useful. Definitely shoot a like and subscribe. By all means, shoot over your comments and questions and your experience, how easy or how headache this whole thing was. I will definitely do a follow-up video if I do find some more up-to-date drivers, newer method. So definitely stay tuned for that, and let me know. Thanks again for watching. Hope you found this helpful. Take care.